PGCPS professional family, and welcome to our Systemic Professional Learning session. We are in the midst of a transformation in Prince George's County Public Schools. Our vision is to be a culturally responsive district, developing distinguished learners, leaders, voices of social justice, and advocates for humanity, today, tomorrow, and beyond. Our mission is to provide a transformative educational experience anchored by excellence and equity. As we develop our students' 21st century competencies, we enable their unique brilliance to flourish in order to build empowered communities and a more inclusive, just world. Our vision and mission guide our why. Our new strategic plan, Transformation 2026, guides our how. These times call for students who are prepared to navigate the world beyond our doors and all that entails. Students with a heart for the community in which they live, work, and serve. Today, we will engage in professional learning around Administrative Procedure 5183, transgender and gender nonconforming students, also known as agender students. At the end of the session, you will be able to continue your learning and dialogue in a team-based environment. Let's have an amazing morning, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Dr. Goldson, for opening us up and introducing our learning today around our transgender and gender nonconforming students policy. But before we talk about that policy today, I want to revisit when I first introduced myself to you all in this role of Director of Equity and Excellence. It was in June 2020 during our very first system-wide PD on unconscious bias and reflecting on our identities. During that learning session, you watched Dr. Goldson and her executive leadership team reflect on their identities, points of pain, points of pride, and stereotypes that they experienced based off of identity. The month was June, and the chat was on fire. I pored over that chat and read through it numerous times, and a couple of your comments really struck me and struck a chord with me. One of you said, PGCPS, it's Pride Month, it's June, and we've heard zero reference to the LGBTQ+ community. PGCPS, we need you. And we heard you. And today, I'm proud to announce that we're going to center our entire work thinking about the LGBTQ+ community, focusing on the T, which stands for transgender. But before we go into that, I actually want to talk a little bit about what every letter in that acronym stands for. L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, LGBT, T, transgender, Q stands for queer or questioning. And lots of people are not as familiar with the I and the A. The I stands for intersex. And intersex means that it's not clear what a child's sexual identity is when the child is born. As a matter of fact, there is a small percentage, like 1/10 to 0.2% of babies who are born, and their sex is not clear. The A stands for agender, and it could also stand for ally or asexual. So there are lots of things that the A means, which is why we have the plus on the end, because IA+ is inclusive of all other identities. As you listen to the description of what's behind those acronyms, some of it might have been personal for you because you might be someone who identifies as LGBTQIA+. But many of us don't identify directly with one of those acronyms. However, I'm willing to bet that we know someone who does. So let's center ourselves for a moment before we engage in the professional learning for today. I want you to think about someone you know, or people you know, who connect to the LGBTQIA+ community directly. It could be a student of yours, a parent, a child, a niece or a nephew. I want you to visualize that person's name as though it's on a whiteboard in front of you. And if you have a pen in front of you, write that person's name down and think about that person's lived experience as you engage in the professional learning for today. When our office sat down to figure out how best to engage the system around this new administrative procedure, we thought, what better way than to hear from the mouths of students and recent alumni themselves. Momentarily, you'll hear a panel, a very powerful panel, of some of our best and brightest in PGCPS who are going to tell you why this administrative procedure is significant and give us an even stronger call to action as we work to become a more culture responsive district and create safe and supportive environments for students and staff. So welcome panel. We'll just go ahead and start with introductions, and we'll start with Alvaro.
Alrighty, well, hello everyone. My name is Alvaro Cerón Ruiz. I'm our current student member at the Board of Education for PGCPS. My pronouns are he, him, his.
Hello everybody, my name is Raylan Del Campo. I'm the current PGRS president and my pronouns are she and her.
Hi, I'm Zan. I'm a current senior.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nina. I'm a recent graduate from Oxon Hill High School. Our pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jaslyn Leonso, and I'm a graduate of Bowie High School, and I'm currently a college student. And my pronouns are she, her.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Richard Moody, and I'm the supervisor for student engagement and school support. My pronouns are he and him.
Well, welcome to all our panelists. And again, my name is David Reese Jr. I'm the director of the Office of Equity and Excellence here in Prince George's County. And I'm excited to host a panel with my colleague, Mr. Moody, current students and recent alumni to talk about a very new administrative procedure, 5183, that just came out in Prince George's County, and it is titled Transgender and Gender Non-Conforming Students. And gender non-conforming can substitute that with agender. That is a word that we're now using to substitute for gender non-conforming. And I know that many of you had the opportunity to kind of take a look at the new administrative procedure, and I'm just curious to know, as a recent alum, as a current student, or as a staff member, what's compelling to you about what's in that procedure?
I can kick it off. I think something like the administrative procedure regarding transgender, agender students is long overdue. And so when it was initially rolled out, it was just some of the biggest excitement I've felt in a long time as a student and now alum. The administrative procedure addresses things such as the identification rights of students in regards to pronouns, gender identity, and sexual identity. It talks about privacy rights that students are endowed with, especially in regards to communication with families and parents and community members. And so just the affirmation being provided to the student body regarding these what is oftentimes considered taboo issues is just something that, again, is long overdue.
I'm going to hop in and agree with everything that Nina stated. I think it's long overdue, and I think as an administrative procedure from our PGCPS administration, it sets the precedent that we are welcoming PGCPS, that our students should be able to feel welcome. They should feel safe in our school buildings. They're going into school to learn, not to be targeted. And so I think by setting this administrative procedure, it really just sets that tone, that welcoming, all our welcome tone for PGCPS when they walk through our doors.
So I'm hearing you all use the phrases welcoming and affirming, and both of you kind of just talked about something being long overdue. And so anyone from the panel can jump in whenever you choose. This is an open dialogue and open flowing conversation. So when you heard Nina and Alvaro talk about something being long overdue, what makes you say long overdue?
I'm gonna just try to give my personal experiences with this question. having friends, you always feel like you want to advocate them. Prince George's County relies heavily off of the sense of community and what we can do for each other. And having an administrative procedure that sets this in place and reassures this to students, reassures that if something were to happen to any of our students, friends, or family, that there is something backing up these students, that there is some sort of sense of security, that if this happens, they can come in and they can report it, or they can report anything that's going on, and they can feel safe doing so because Prince George's County is showing that they're being defended. Whereas I feel like in past situations, whether it's us or it's families or staff that just aren't informed on the topics we're talking about here today, it's often that certain communities are not being involved, or they're not being addressed properly, or certain people do not feel like they're being addressed properly and they're not being included in the conversation. And so simple things like, for example, us introducing our pronouns when we came in here today, that's showing, hey, this is a welcoming space and I advocate for you, which was not the situation before.
I just wanted to hop on, and I think something that Jasmine was pointing towards was representation. And I think that that's something that this administrative procedure does well, is ensure that we're representing this group of our students well, showing that we encourage diversity and proper equity in our school system. And so I think I just wanted to point that out, that that's something that truly is shown, proper representation in our policies.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, Mr. Moody.
Okay. And Mr. Reese, as somebody that's been in the school system for a while, hearing Nina and Alvaro say or describe this as something that is long overdue, I very much agree with that, because in the past we have seen such a document materialize and then maybe not really go anywhere. And now we actually have something that is in place. And to answer your other question, one of the most compelling things about this procedure for me, and what I think one of the most salient parts of it are, would be under number 6 procedures, where it says identification, and specifically says that a student has a right to be addressed by a name and a pronoun that corresponds to that student's gender identity. So that really resonated for me, especially given what's been happening in a neighboring state.
Just to piggyback on what everybody said, including especially Jaslyn, when she said about pronouns, especially. In my past experience before, when a student would correct a teacher about their pronouns, they wouldn't really know how to respond. Usually they would just dismiss it and just say, okay, but never really go through with their pronouns, keep forgetting that the student has corrected them. And I feel like the student wouldn't feel safe in that environment, or especially going to school at all, now that they don't feel accepted. But now that we have an administrative procedure, I feel like what everyone said, it's a very welcoming environment and safe environment, and to know that they're accepted.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So in Prince George's County right now, we're talking a lot about what it means to be a culturally responsive school district. And as I'm a part of a lot of professional learning about that concept, psychological safety and feeling safe and that you belong is central to being able to learn. And that's at the essence of what it means to be a culturally responsive school district. We want people to feel safe and welcome so they can process information and learn at high levels. And so, Raylan, you really made a point that if I'm not affirmed by the pronouns that I want to be affirmed by, or being called what I want to be called, it signals a lack of safety. And just in hearing you say it in that way so succinctly helps me understand as an adult why it's really important to call people what they want to be called. And Mr. Moody, stated it very quickly that students have a right, a legal right, to be called by something that affirms their gender identity, and that students have the ability and rights and mental capacity to make that determination for themselves, which is powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, as a trans student, having something to fall back on if I were ever in that type of situation, which luckily I haven't been in that situation, but it just makes me feel a lot safer. And also the fact that like there's these types of things coming out now, it's really cool because I didn't really know about any of this stuff for a really long time, because it's like it's not shown in the media and it's not taught in schools. So the fact that now we are starting to have like resources available to students and we're starting to back up trans and LGBTQ people, it makes me feel safe.
If we could do one of those Wordle clouds, safety and feeling backed up and advocating and advocacy would be some of the biggest phrases that are out there. So thank you all for sharing. And I want to probe a little bit more deeply here. So when we think about things that adults can do to advocate for, be an ally for, and ensure student safety, what are some of the things that you've seen adults in our system do that have been affirming to the LGBTQ plus population?
Yeah, so a really fantastic idea or initiative that I came across at some point was that there was a teacher who would post like the equivalent of like safe space signage in their classroom. So like either a poster or some sort of like indicator that, or some sort of like universal indicator that they were a safe space to certain marginalized students, but specifically students a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And so what this does is that this signals to students a part of those marginalized communities or marginalized identities that that individual, that teacher is a person that students can come to for conversations regarding their identity. And I think that's something really powerful, because sometimes in school, you don't know who you can and can't talk to about certain things, who will understand, who won't understand, and whatever underlying feelings they may have about it. And so that's something that was really brilliant that I saw.
I would say not having to, I mean, you don't really have to, what am I trying to say? Okay, smaller things I've personally seen, I guess, would be teachers taking the time to actually ask students for their pronouns and ask for their preferred names. Because as we know, School Max isn't going to show the preferred name students would like to be called. And so I think teachers taking the time to actually ask, like, what do you prefer to be called? I think that speaks a lot towards that grouping of teachers who want to take the initiative to ensure students feel welcome in the classroom and that they're not offending any of their students.
And to piggyback off that real quick, I know a teacher not only asks for pronouns, but also asks for the pronouns that are safe to use at home for like parents. And that, I like that.
Can you say more about why you like that?
More about why I like that? Well, I mean, because not everybody has someone at home who is okay with them. And it's nice to have a teacher who is willing to use your specific pronouns around you, but still keep you safe from the people who might not like how you are so much.
Thank you for elaborating a little bit. And I asked that question because I know that I've had lots of emails from staff members in Prince George's County who've said, I have students who are very, very young. Sometimes they're in the second grade, sometimes kindergarten, and in some instances pre-K, who are saying that my sex assigned at birth is not how I want to identify my gender. And there's a lot of, for some of our staff members, there's some newness around like how do you approach that, and what and when and how do you involve the parents. And so, Zan, I think you make a beautiful point here when we're saying that staff members can and should ask the question around what should it look like when I communicate at home, so that the student is brought, so that the student can continue to advocate for himself, herself, or themselves around what's going to keep them safe. We know from the Trevor Project data that some of you might have been able to look at that there are lots of students who are part of the LGBTQ plus community who are not safe at home and are not safe in their communities.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Bailey, and I'm an equity coach with the Office of Equity and Excellence. David just referenced the Trevor Project's 2021 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health. This survey sheds light on many of the challenges faced by LGBTQ youth by capturing the experiences of nearly 35,000 LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 24 from all across the United States. This data shares both daunting statistics as well as opportunities for us to support our youth. Let's take a brief look at some of the data points. 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. This number included more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. 12% of white youth attempted suicide, compared to 31% of Native and Indigenous youth and 21% of Black youth and multiracial youth. The risk of suicide attempts increased when factoring in discrimination. 36% of LGBTQ youth who experienced discrimination based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and race or ethnicity reported attempting suicide, compared to only 7% of LGBTQ youth who did not experience discrimination. And while we can anticipate that risk to increase, the difference between 36% and 7% is impactful. Half of LGBTQ youth of color reported discrimination based on their race or ethnicity in the past year, including 67% of Black LGBTQ youth and 60% of Asian and Pacific Islander LGBTQ youth. While these statistics are daunting, there are actions that each and every one of us can take to support LGBTQ youth in our community. Affirming transgender and non-binary youth by respecting their pronouns is associated with lower rates of attempting suicide. And as David already mentioned, LGBTQ youth with at least one accepting adult in their lives were less likely to attempt suicide. In addition to describing a number of challenges in their lives, youth who participated in the survey also listed ways they find joy and strength. Take a minute to read some of the responses and think about the opportunities that you have as part of the PGCPS community to help bring joy and strength to the lives of our students. These survey results highlight for us the importance of creating gender-affirming procedures, as well as the opportunities that we have to make changes in our own lives to show up for the children and community that we serve. I am proud that PGCPS has developed Administrative Procedure 5183, which provides information and guidance to students, parents, and staff on the rights, responsibilities, and best education practices to support transgender and gender nonconforming students in PGCPS. Stay tuned to hear about the administrative procedure and learn more from our amazing student panel. If you'd like to look at additional data and information on how to support LGBTQ youth, visit thetrevorproject.org or scan the QR code on the screen. And that's done.
Keeping with the earlier question that you asked, but one of the things that I love to see adults in schools do, it doesn't have to necessarily be a teacher, but to stand up and actually volunteer to sponsor or co-sponsor an organization or something similar to, or something that is a gay-straight alliance, so that those LGBTQ students and their allies can be supported and feel supported in our schools.
Do any of you have a GSA at your school? What kinds of activities did they do or are they currently doing?
I wasn't a part of my school's GSAs, but I had friends and peers who were, and some who served as officers in the organization. From my understanding, a lot of their initiatives were discussion centered. And so they would pull students together, those who were part of the organization, those who weren't, to have really important intra-community conversations about what it's like navigating school as a part of the LGBTQ community. What is it like navigating, the world at large, home life, and different factors that play into being a part of that community. And so I think one of the things that was so important about that organization is that it also spurred conversation in the broader school community at large as well. So posting up flyers and advertising different events in the conversations that they were having, spurring conversation in classrooms around preferred names and preferred pronouns. And so kind of like these smaller things that really begin to upend how school typically functions for students a part of the LGBTQ community.
And Zan, were you going to weigh in about what's happening with GSA?
Well, mine is more like just a regular club. We kind of just we don't do a lot of actions. A lot of it is just hanging out and doing stuff with people who are like us. And I mean, sometimes there are discussions on stuff, but we don't really push anything into action. So
that's awesome, because I will push on you a little bit to say that the fact that you are existing in a space where people can come and collect and just kind of be is an action, and it's meaningful. So sometimes you might have an organization that's politically active or one that's trying to learn and do book studies, and sometimes people want to hang out and connect and be in what's called an affinity space, a space where you have people who are supporters, who are like you, and who affirm you for who you are. And it's very powerful that schools are creating spaces where students can kind of be who they are. It's interesting. I think it was Nina who was speaking earlier around safe space zones.
It's 5 o'clock.
Something a safe space. And I think, and that was making me wonder, when you signal a safe space for LGBTQ plus students, who else might you be signaling a safe space for? So I think it's important to remember that as adults and students, when we advocate for one marginalized population, we're saying to other marginalized groups that we will advocate for you too, in a very subtle but also very matter-of-fact way. So safety for one could be safety for all. All right, so let's change topics a little bit because someone talked about things being taboo and difficult to discuss. When you think about your curriculum in the PGCP, a school district, and times where you've been able to talk about issues connected to the LGBTQ plus community, did you have opportunities to do that in the curriculum? And if so, what did that look like?
I would say not really. I think something that happens with not all teachers, but definitely some teachers will be uncomfortable to have uncomfortable conversations, um, which I think really just takes away from discussions that we really should be having discussions on, I guess, when it comes to the health curriculum about what it means to be more inclusive for the LGBTQ community, what it means to be safe when it comes to gender nonconforming students. Um, and so I think when it comes to the curriculum, we're not doing enough to ensure that there is that inclusivity. I personally don't feel I've really had much talks when it comes to LGBTQ figures. I think the most we've ever really touched on, but touched, never gone into, was Stonewall, and that was it. But never go into it, only touch on it. I think it really shouldn't be that way.
I personally, I want to say from middle school to high school experience, it was never a topic of conversation, even from our health, sex ed classes or courses. It was always a taboo thing. And I feel now people are finally starting to see times are changing, but the people are not. We have always had this same community. The only difference is that now we're advocating for them. And now we're starting to turn the tables. And now, like, rather than, for example, people who find it taboo to talk about the LGBT community or gender nonconforming, the tables are turning towards now we have teachers who respect our students, and it's kind of a monkey see, monkey do. If you see that the teacher is respecting the students are going to respect the students because they're setting that standard in the classroom. And I think that's really what's changing. But in terms of curriculum, as I mentioned before, I'm a graduate, and it was never something that was spoken about until we were old enough to meet people and identify ourselves and be confident in ourselves. But it wasn't something that the school was giving us. It was something that we were giving each other.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Jaslyn and Alvaro just expressed. I mean, I can't really remember a distinct, time in class in my mind when we had conversations regarding, the LGBTQ community or even like important figures. You had novelists, you had poets, you had artists, scientists, mathematicians, elected officials who historically either contributed to the fight, for securing rights and respect for the LGBTQ community, or they themselves identified as a part of that community. But I think even then, in the few instances where we did have this type of conversation, oftentimes the LGBTQ community or individuals within that community was used to kind of like fill gaps. So it wasn't a very good like concerted effort to actually like integrate, the community and, everything about the community into the curriculum or into our discussion. It was kind of like, oh, we're talking about history. And we're going to sprinkle in a few LGBTQ historical figures. It's kind of like what we do with like Black History Month or Pacific Islander Month. Like kind of like a gap filling mechanism more so than a cohesive effort.
I'm actually agree. Oh, my bad, Lynn. Go ahead.
Thank you. But just to like sum up and to relate to Alvaro, Nina, and Jaslyn, me personally, I didn't really hear about the LGBTQ community until like middle school, And when I was first starting to learn about the community, it seemed as if I felt left out or didn't really know about it because it was never really taught in school, like piggyback off what Jasmine said, like the sex education classes that we have in school, they're mainly about the reproductive system, on the body parts of the body, both female and male, but never really touch on the LGBTQ community specifically. In history classes, they only put in some movements. They never really went into detail because it was too uncomfortable for them. And you can tell by their facial expressions. And like what everyone has been saying, we learn from each other. There were some instances where we made mistakes, and that's okay. As long as we corrected ourselves, I feel like it is a learning process to get moving on in our community.
And Raylan alluded to the information around LGBTQ being too uncomfortable for them in reference to teachers. Raylan went on to say that you can tell by their facial expressions. I wonder how many of us are making facial expressions or exhibiting body language that demonstrates that we are uncomfortable or not concerned. Something to think about. What are your hesitations with affirming those in this particular marginalized group? And what are some ways that you can overcome those challenges so that all students and others may feel welcomed and a part of your classroom, school, or professional community?
And I didn't actually learn about anything LGBTQ plus related until like the summer before 9th grade. And that wasn't even because of school. That was because I went to a theater camp full of LGBTQ people. And I remember distinctly in 9th grade, we had one class on LGBTQ plus stuff. And it wasn't even teaching us about the stuff. We did an ABCs of LGBTQ plus labels. And we just called out the labels and he wrote them down, and we didn't like talk about what they meant or anything. We just did that, and then the next class we watched a movie or something. So
awesome. So this level of conversation in terms of the health curriculum is making me think, Mr. Moody, back to some welcoming schools professional learning that you and I participated in. And there is a small yet significant percentage of babies who are born, and when they are born, it is not clear what their gender, what their sex is, whether they are male or female. And it just made me think about the binary that we put out there in our health education classes, that you are born male or female, when there are, and not only science, but live baby births show us that there is more nuance to sex than what's on that binary. So that's a huge opportunity for us just to be a little more inclusive and open and factual about how people are born, which could probably help more people understand how people have different ways of identifying themselves when it comes to gender on what some people will call the gender identity spectrum.
So I do want to touch on a couple things. So firstly, with what Nina was saying, that there isn't really concentrated or wanted, I guess, motive towards actually teaching LGBTQ history or figures. It's really just been kind of like filling a quota, kind of. That's the vibe I've gotten. And then tying in with what Raylan was saying about, not talking about it for elementary or middle school students, I think that's dangerous. I think we're setting our students to have to wonder if, I guess, what they are is wrong. And I can personally touch on that. I mean, going to a school where, you're really just taught straight is the way it is. And then later on finding out that you were personally wrong, that what you are is fine, that you are valid. And so that's why I say I think it's dangerous, because I mean, if we're not making the effort as an educational institute where people look towards for facts, and we're not setting this nuance, then we're just failing as a school system.
You put a nice spin on that, because depending on what generation you come from or what your upbringing and beliefs are around the types of topics you do or don't talk about, there are people who feel that to talk about LGBTQ or to say gay or transgender out of your mouth is dangerous as an adult. And what you're saying, Alvaro, is the opposite, that not talking about it is dangerous for students' well being, students' self perception. And when we normalize one way of being and only talk about one way of being, it disaffirms other ways, which is really dangerous. So that was a really nice way of helping people think differently about what really is dangerous. Which makes me wonder, why do you think it is that some people, some adults and students, have this discomfort talking about LGBTQ and saying things out loud?
I can jump in. School, in large part, is a microcosm of society at large, and society at large operates, I would say, in a fairly like gendered and a gendered binary, and we operate as a heteronormative society, right? So as Alvaro said, it's almost painted as if being straight or identifying as cis is the norm. And if you deviate from that, there's something wrong with, that frame in that picture. And so I feel like just in the United States specifically, we're kind of socialized from birth of that framing that straight is the norm, and that is how you should identify yourself as, or you should identify yourself as cis. And so I think a lot of students, or in some staff members in some cases, feel as if they, again, like deviate from that they will be painted as somehow being wrong or at fault, or not adhering to what society wants.
I would like to kind of add on to that. I feel that there is a gap between us and other generations, and some are more informed and some are not. And, we see a lot on social media. I'm going to use cancel culture as a very loose term right now, but, people get canceled quick, and, people sometimes feel that same way. But of course, not putting your own self at risk. I do not want to say that anyone has to do this, but if you have the opportunity to and you feel safe to, opening it up for people to make mistakes. It's definitely, if it's something you've never heard about and it's something that you're not informed about. I know me, myself, like I had to have that conversation with my family of just like letting them know, because I have friends, I have family who identify themselves differently than what my family is aware of. So I kind of sat down and I was like, hey, I want to talk to you guys about this. And luckily, my very loving family was like, well, okay, like if you want to. And we sat down for a really long time. And, there was things that certain older parts of my family didn't understand. And so they had questions upon why this or why that, or like, is this okay? Is this not okay? What is okay to you? And what is the importance of this, I want to say, because depending on where you come from or what your background is, you may not understand all of that. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not understand. But I had this conversation with my family, and I want to say, despite the fact that they may not understand everything, even after our entire conversations, that they understand the importance, they understand how to address if the situation were to come up and I were to introduce them to a friend or family and be like, hello, this person is so-and-so and their pronouns are so-and-so. They understand the importance of identifying that person in that way because it makes them feel safe, rather than an argument of what is right or wrong. Because to me, right is advocating for people and caring about people. And that's the same way my family orientates themselves. But also, I don't want to put out that like, all of you guys have to have a conversation, all of you guys have to do this or that, because not everyone is in a safe place to do so. But just like, you know, if you do open up the conversation, don't shame others for their mistakes within this learning process.
Brilliant. Brilliantly stated. And so in the chat, I just dropped in a copy of the Prince George's County Public Schools vision statement. Jaslyn, brilliant. And it says, we want to be a culturally responsive district, developing distinguished learners, leaders, voices of social justice, and advocates for humanity for the world of today, tomorrow, and beyond. And I've seen so many examples of our recent alumni and current students being the vision of PGCPS, a very, very powerful vision. And I want to make sure that we hear Jaslyn's words. And those words were, my very loving family, had to be in a space where they could learn something that they were open and willing to learn, but had to learn from someone who came from a younger generation. And what's most important is that as people are on a learning process and on a learning journey, that people are not shamed for what they don't know, ridiculed or harassed for what they don't know. That there are ways that we can call people in to learning with us as we see that nobody is perfect. We all have these imperfections, we all have biases, and we all have blind spots. But it's really powerful that we create learning spaces for everyone, even the people who we think might have said something that's offensive. There are ways that we can approach people with an open heart and mind to bring them into collective meaning making. So Jaslyn, thank you for those words. So as I pop the vision statement in there, is there anything in there that resonates with you all that you just want to reflect back to the PGCPS community? And if you don't
all
have
of it.
All of it?
All of it. I love it. And I do. I think from like just like my general understanding of vision statements and like I guess the few that I've seen, you have a lot of public institutions, schools who craft their vision around the notion of we're going to develop students who can go out into the 21st century world and compete with all the other students also going into the 21st century world. And in my understanding of that, it's like, okay, we want to develop students who can compete economically, compete for jobs, and compete for industries and careers. And that's important. Being a broke college student isn't fun. I don't want to do that all my life. But I think with this vision statement, what PGCPS does that's so amazing and beautiful is that it commits itself, and it's a very bold declaration that we are invested in developing students who are good people, who have a strong sense of self, who have a strong character. And I think that's something that's sometimes understated when we think about the role of a school and what all these different moving parts of school are supposed to do in the long run. And so that's why I love the vision statement. I think it's the best thing I've seen since sliced bread or whatever people say. So I love it.
And Nina, I would just add to what you said that I like the vision too. And from my old guy perspective, I would just add that if the students that we are talking to, that Mr. Reese and I are talking to right now, are an example, then I think that we are moving in the right direction to achieve that vision.
Community that you have not yet had the opportunity to say, that you just wanted to just kind of get your 30 seconds to 45 seconds to a minute to say, PGCPS, this is what I want you to hear from me. You have the opportunity to do so now.
Right, so thank you. I mean, tying in with the vision statement being developing students who are culturally responsive, who are going to be social justice warriors, I think there still is work to be done as a school district to ensure we're achieving that goal. And I think that's really what this administrative procedure takes the first steps towards, ensuring that cultural responsibility. I mean, it's said that school is like a second home. And so for a lot of students who may not feel safe at home, it's our job as a school system, as teachers, to ensure that we're bringing that nurturing, that caring environment that our students deserve. And so with this AP, it includes our LGBTQ and our gender non-conforming students. And so I think that that is something so beautiful that we have yet to continue to work on, but that I'm truly appreciated for.
Add on to Alvaro's 30 seconds to the faculty who will be watching. I mean, you all play no small part and no small role in the progress of our community and the progress of our county. I mean, it's a all hands on deck type effort to make sure that students are going to school in a school system that not only affirms their identity, but values it, teaches about it, teaches other students about it, and builds this sort of like allyship. And so when we talk about, this is just a stepping stone and there's still more work to be done, you all, in addition with students and community members and parents and so on and decision makers, you all are part of that ongoing pursuit for something greater and that ongoing pursuit for a brighter and bolder and more welcoming PGCPS. And so I would leave that with you all.
This may sound redundant, but I want to just add on to what 99 Alvaro said. I would just like to tell staff to not be afraid of making mistakes. I feel like the reason why a lot of teachers and staff who don't feel comfortable on bringing up the topic of the LGBTQ community is because of those mistakes. But I feel like if you announce that if they get anything wrong, for their students to correct them in order to make it a safe environment and securing environment. Because like Alvaro said, school is like a second home to these students or to most students, and we need to make sure that it's a safe environment for all of those.
I did want to add a little bit just for I want to say our authority figures, our staff, the people who are working hard to support Prince George's County, and some of the students. Prince George's County, you better rally. This is not something for you guys to be like, oh, like on the back burner, like Prince George's County's talking about like the LGBT community. No, this is a life or death situation. It's not a political argument. There are students that need to be advocated for. There's a community that needs to be represented. There are students that need to feel loved and safe. And that's not an argument. That's a need in our county. And we're doing all these really beautiful things, but this isn't something that can just be left behind. If you are representing someone, if you are in an environment to take care of someone, you are responsible for someone or responsible for yourself. You need to use that power to make sure that you are taking care of that person, that you are doing what you can, whether that's yourself or that's others, because their life could potentially be in your hands. And we should treat every person like their life values, because you don't know what's going on. So Prince George's County, to all like the staff, the teachers, the adults who want to advocate for their students, it's frivolous. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of history because of the fact that a lot of things aren't being taught. But you better work. There's no more options anymore. Your children, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles hate to just tackle on all these pathos and not trying to get to anyone's emotions, but like there's no options. It's no longer a choice. It's advocating to make sure that our students are alive and our teachers are alive, our teachers feel represented and safe. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we spend like a majority of our time at school. Like we're there for months on end every day for weeks. And it's just what we see at school is it's like all we see. So if we don't see that there's representation in school, if we don't see that there are people like us in school, then it makes us feel like there's nobody out there who knows how we feel. And that can kind of hurt a lot. But just knowing somebody's there to care and who's willing to help, that helps with that a lot.
What I think I'm hearing, well, not what I think I'm hearing, what I know I'm hearing, a lot of these young adults say, and this really resonates with me as an adult, is that they really are relying on us to help them make this world a more welcoming world, and to make it just simply a better world, and to make our schools as welcoming as they can possibly be. They are asking for our help. So I think it's our responsibility to help them.
Hello, my name is Tony Mejias, and I am the Assistant to the Office of Equity and Excellence. As I was listening to our student panel, one of the things I heard was that students are uncomfortable and afraid to speak up. But I also heard words like welcoming and accepting. I really want to say that I am very proud to work for a school district whose school board members and CEO care so much about our students that they are championing and leading the work on equity and welcoming schools. You may want to ask, what is welcoming schools? This time last year, a cadre of 15 staff members were trained by the Human Rights Campaign in order for us to come back to our school district and lead our schools and their staff on how to embrace LGBTQAI+ students. The very first module in that program is embracing all families. And isn't that our goal, to embrace all of our families and all of our students? I think we're moving in the right direction. With the creation of the new equity policy, the new protected class that was added to the Civil Rights Act, the passing of the blueprint to Maryland, and now that we have equity leads in our schools, we're on the right path. Stay tuned for more information on how to become a welcoming school.
Last year, I had several opportunities to work with students from the Prince George's Regional Association of Student Governments, and their motto is lead by example. You saw a clear example of what they mean when they say lead by example, as was exhibited in the panel discussion today. Every time I met with our students last year, I would talk to them about the bias work that was happening in our system, that we were doing a book study on this book as anti-racist, that changes were happening to the curriculum to become more inclusive and culturally responsive, and I even talked to them about our Welcoming Schools initiative that we were being trained in. And every single time I met with our students, I got a direct message from a student in the chat that said, when will our teachers learn about welcoming schools? They were asking for our support, and I'm glad that Tony shared with you that we plan to deliver, and look forward to seeing you engaging in the professional development that's going to allow us to become more welcoming, culturally responsive, and inclusive. As we conclude our session for the day, we also wanted to let you know that we heard other responses from you during our strategic planning survey process. Many of you said, we do these videos about equity and cultural responsiveness and bias, but in some of our schools or in our central office departments, there is no next step. Well, today, there will be a next step. If you are school-based, your school-based equity lead is prepared with your principal to lead you all in continued dialogue around either what you saw today or something connected to your equity plan. And if you're central office, we have tools and resources available to support your next steps in your dialogue. By the end of the day, everyone will receive a survey where we'll get feedback from you about your experience with us during the video and what happened in your local context. We look forward to hearing back from you. Continue having an amazing day.